Hi, hello, and welcome. My name is Heather. This loaf of bread is Miss Finn. And this is Nice People, where we talk about the kinds of things nice people don't talk about. Miss Finn is no stranger to this channel. But something you may not know about her is that, in addition to being the light of my life, she's also my emotional support animal. Emotional support animals have exploded in popularity in recent years. But despite their increasing prevalence, there's still a lot of confusion about them. Like, are they the same thing as service animals? Is emotional support animal just a meaningless label to glorify pets? Where can or can't I bring my emotional support animal? And how do you even get an emotional support animal? I'm going to answer all of these questions and more, and make it really easy for you to understand everything you need to know about service and emotional support animals. And to top it all off, I'm going to share with you how Miss Finn went from being my pet to being my emotional support animal, and what kind of functions she serves for me in that role. So stay tuned. Service animals versus emotional support animals. Even though the terms are often used interchangeably, service animals and emotional support animals are not the same thing. Let's start by clarifying what service animals are, because I think they're the simplest or easiest to understand, and once we have that base, it'll make it that much easier to understand what emotional support animals are. Oh yeah, you're also going to learn everything about service animals too. All of the rights and protections that service animals have comes from the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. The ADA defines a service animal as a dog or miniature horse that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. The tasks performed by the dog or mini horse must be directly related to the person's disability. So these are things like guiding a visually impaired person, alerting a hearing impaired person, alerting a person with diabetes to high and low blood sugar levels, pulling a wheelchair, and detecting the onset of seizures in people with epilepsy and help the person remain safe during the seizure. Those are just a few of the examples of what service animals can do. There are a couple of subcategories of service animals, such as psychiatric service animals, which are dogs or mini horses, that's been trained to perform tasks that assist individuals with disabilities to detect the onset of psychiatric episodes and lessen their effects. Some of the tasks they might do include reminding the handler to take medicine, providing safety checks or room searches, turning on lights for persons with PTSD, interrupting self-harm by persons with dissociative identity disorder, and keeping disoriented individuals from danger. Pretty important and impressive stuff. Another subcategory of service animals are sensory signal or social signal dogs, which are trained to assist people with autism. I didn't see anything about sensory signal or social signal mini horses, but they very well could exist. They probably do. Okay, so what are the key takeaways so far? Number 1, service animals are only ever dogs or miniature horses. That's it. And number 2, service animals are trained, keyword being trained, to perform tasks that assist their handler with a disability. Service animal, dog or mini horse only, trained to perform tasks. Okay? Let's move on. Although service animals are required to be trained, they are not required to be professionally trained. There are lots of people and organizations that do train service animals, but you can train them on your own. The only training requirement is that they perform tasks related to a disability. Documentation. The ADA is very clear that service animals are not required to be certified, registered, or licensed as service animals, nor do they require any kind of documentation proving that they're a service animal. And this is straight from the ADA website. There are individuals and organizations that sell service animal certification or registration documents online. These documents do not convey any rights under the ADA, and the Department of Justice does not recognize them as proof that the dog, or mini horse, is a service animal. That's right, all of those websites are knowingly selling you a fake product, so do not give them your money. Also, service animals are not required to wear a special ID, vest, or harness identifying them as a service animal. A lot of people do have their service animal wear something to identify them as a service animal, but I think it's more to let other people know that their service animal is a hardworking professional doing a job, so do not come up to them and start petting them or distracting them in any way. Send your love from afar. Now let's talk about where service animals are and are not allowed. The ADA states that service animals are allowed everywhere the general public is allowed to go, including stores, restaurants, parks, restrooms, hospitals, schools, public transportation, taxis, rideshare services, etc. In 1986, Congress passed the Air Carrier Access Act to prohibit commercial airlines from discriminating against people with disabilities, meaning you can take your service animal, even a mini horse, on a plane with you, and they are exempt from pet policies and fees. Airlines can require people traveling with service animals to fill out some DOT forms attesting to their training and behavior. And basically, it's just stating that the animal is a service animal trained to assist you with a disability and that it's healthy. You also have to acknowledge that you are financially responsible for any damage they cause, and that you can be removed from the flight if you're failing to control the service animal, and that you know it is a crime to willfully misrepresent a service animal or lie about your pet being a service animal. But beyond that, you are not required to provide any documentation or proof that it's a service animal. When it comes to hotels and lodging, service animals are not restricted to pet-friendly accommodations. They are not subject to pet deposits or fees, including additional cleaning fees. Housing. Service animals are exempt from all pet policies, pet fees and deposits, pet rent, everything. Even breed and size restrictions. While the ADA only applies to state and local government housing programs, the Fair Housing Act applies to virtually all types of housing, both public and privately owned. Under the Fair Housing Act, housing providers are obligated to permit, as a reasonable accommodation, the use of animals that work, provide assistance, or perform tasks that benefit persons with a disability, or provide emotional support to alleviate a symptom or effect of a disability. Don't worry, we're going to revisit that last part when we talk about emotional support animals. Even though the ADA states that service animals can go anywhere the public is allowed to go, there are a couple of exceptions to that. One exception is if the service animal would fundamentally alter the nature of a service or program. For example, certain areas of zoos, where the animals on display are either the natural predator or prey of dogs, and having the dogs might cause a disruption or safety hazard. However, service animals are only restricted from those areas, not the entire zoo. And the other exception is religious institutions and organizations, because they are exempt from the ADA. However, there may be state and local laws that permit them, so always be sure to check the laws in your state. So to recap all of that. Number 1, under the ADA, service animals are allowed everywhere the general public is allowed, unless it's a religious institution or organization, or if they would alter the nature of a service or program. Number 2, they are not considered pets. Therefore, they are not subject to pet policies, restrictions, deposits, fees, etc. What questions can and can't be asked regarding service animals? There are only 2 questions that can be asked and that you are required to answer. Number 1, is the dog or mini horse a service animal required because of a disability? And number 2, what work or task has the dog or mini horse been trained to perform? That's it. Only those 2 questions. Some of the things they can't ask or require are, number 1, they cannot ask for or require documentation proving the animal is a service animal. Number 2, to demonstrate the tasks they're trained to perform. And number 3, they cannot inquire about the nature of a person's disability. Disabilities are private medical information. And here's where a lot of the negative discourse and confusion around service animals and emotional support animals comes from, because if businesses can't require some kind of proof that an animal is in fact a service animal, then can't anyone just say that their animal is a service animal? As long as it's a dog or a mini horse, yeah, they can. And there are absolutely people who exploit this and lie about having a disability and lie about having a service animal so that they can bring their pet places they're not allowed. Those people are scum, and they contribute to a negative view of service and emotional support animals. And I hope they step on a Lego and bare feet every time they do it. Also, it's now a crime in most states to willfully misrepresent a service animal, so scumbags beware. But remember, if the animal is being disruptive, or their handler isn't able to control them, or they're defecating on the floor, they can legally be asked to leave. And it's very unlikely that a real, trained service animal would cause any of those problems. So here are your main takeaways about service animals. Number 1, they are dogs or mini horses only. Number 2, they're trained to assist their handlers with disabilities. Number 3, they're allowed to go anywhere that the general public is allowed to go, with a few very rare exceptions. Number 4, they are not required to prove they're a service animal. Number 5, they are exempt from all pet policies. And number 6, they are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Air Carrier Access Act, the Fair Housing Act, and other state and local laws. That wasn't too bad, right? Now that we know what service animals are, let's talk about what emotional support animals are. What is an emotional support animal? Emotional support animals, or comfort animals, provide a therapeutic benefit to people with qualifying psychiatric disabilities. And that just means psychiatric disabilities that can benefit from emotional support animals. And this benefit comes from their presence alone. They are not trained to perform tasks. That's how they differ from, say, a psychiatric service animal, because psychiatric service animals are trained to assist with disabilities. Emotional support animals, no training. Emotional support animals can be any domesticated animal, including dogs, cats, rabbits, mini pigs, ferrets, mice, etc. Contrary to popular belief, emotional support animals are not pseudoscience. Studies have shown that emotional support animals are correlated with significant reductions in anxiety, loneliness, and depression. In fact, the lead investigator in one of these studies cited pets and emotional support animals as a common reason given for why people with depression didn't end their lives. I am one of those people, but more on that later. Emotional support animals are also known to reduce stress and pain, normalize heart rate and blood pressure, increase pleasure, and enhance social engagement and interaction, just to name a few. So to quickly recap what we just went over, emotional support animals provide a therapeutic benefit to people with certain psychiatric disabilities. They can be any domesticated animal, and the key way that they differ from service animals is that they're not trained to perform tasks related to disability. But even though they're not trained, they are scientifically proven to benefit people with these disabilities. Emotional support animal requirements. Emotional support animals don't require training, but that doesn't mean that any pet or animal can legally be an emotional support animal. In order to actually be an emotional support animal, a qualified mental health professional must first determine that the owner or handler has a qualifying psychiatric disability. It seems to vary by state as to how long the person has to be seen by the qualified mental health professional before they can make that determination. But there are requirements. You can't just go to a mental health professional and say, "Hey, I've got this going on. Can you make my pet an emotional support animal?" Does not work like that. And second, the qualified mental health professional must recommend or prescribe, in a properly formatted prescription letter, an emotional support animal to assist with that person's disability. So they differ from service animals in two key ways. Number one, unlike service animals, they don't require training of any kind. And number two, emotional support animals do require documentation proving they're an emotional support animal. So to recap what we've learned so far, number one, emotional support animals provide a therapeutic benefit to people with certain psychiatric disabilities. Number two, they can be any domesticated animal. Number three, they don't require any training. And number four, they do require documentation proving they're an emotional support animal in the form of a prescription letter from a qualified mental health professional. Where emotional support animals are and are not allowed. Here's where things start to get kind of confusing. Although, not really confusing, but you'll see what I mean. Despite one of the requirements for emotional support animals being that their owner has a disability, they are not protected from discrimination by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Seems kind of weird, right?
You ready?
Therefore, emotional support animals are subject to no pet policies or service animal only policies in public places. And this also now includes air travel. Since Congress passed the Air Carrier Access Act in 1986, both service animals and emotional support animals were permitted to fly on planes and were exempt from pet policies. But in 2021, the Department of Transportation implemented new rules, allowing airlines to discriminate against emotional support animals and treat them as pets. So now they are subject to pet policies and fees and requirements like having to be stowed in the cargo hold of planes. Pretty much eliminated that mode of travel for people with emotional support animals for their psychiatric disability. Remember, we're still talking about people with disabilities here. I mean, it's done that for me. There is no way I would stow her in the cargo hold of a plane because she would most likely die. Not to mention, that has to be terrifying for animals. You know, years ago, when I flew back from Germany with her, she slept on my lap the entire 11-hour flight and really helped me to manage my panic that entire time. But anyway, to summarize, emotional support animals do not have any of the same protections that service animals do, despite them both being for people with disabilities. There is one major exception, which we kind of touched on before, and that's when it comes to housing. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, an assistance animal, or emotional support animal, is an animal that works, provides assistance, or performs tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability, or that provides emotional support that alleviates one or more identified effects of a person's disability. Individuals with a disability may request to keep an assistance animal, or emotional support animal, as a reasonable accommodation to a housing provider's pet restrictions. The Fair Housing Act requires public and private housing providers to allow reasonable accommodations for assistance animals as long as, number one, the person with a disability requests a reasonable accommodation for their emotional support animal, and number two, the request was supported by reliable disability-related information, like the letter from a qualified mental health professional prescribing the animal. Under the Fair Housing Act, emotional support animals are exempt from pet policies, breed and weight restrictions, and pet-related fees like pet deposits, pet rent, additional cleaning costs, etc., although you still are financially responsible for any damage your emotional support animal causes. There are a couple of reasons why housing providers could deny that reasonable accommodation, but they're pretty rare. Basically, they would have to prove that despite any measures that they took for this reasonable accommodation, that if the emotional support animal would cause such a safety or health hazard that they just can't allow it, or that it would become some kind of financial burden. Even though emotional support animals aren't protected from discrimination, there are a lot of places that do allow them, but that's totally up to their discretion. They are not legally required to do it. For example, Uber's policy is that it's up to the driver to accept or deny a rider accompanied by an emotional support animal. The clinic where I do Spravato is very dog-friendly. There's dogs in there all the time, including emotional support animals. I don't bring Finn in for my Spravato appointments because they're pretty long. She just stays out in the car with my boyfriend. But I did bring her to all of my TMS appointments last year. She came with me and sat on my lap for those appointments. Very helpful for me. In fact, pretty much the deciding factor as to whether or not I could undergo those treatments. And I found out that King County, Washington, has actually passed laws giving emotional support animals the same rights and access as service animals do. Good to know in the future. It's been my experience that the vast majority of places open to the public only allow service animals. My advice for anyone with an emotional support animal is to assume that they're not allowed and plan for that, or check ahead of time. Also, make sure you know your state and local laws. I had no idea that King County has granted emotional support animals the same kind of rights as service animals. Very cool. Makes a lot of sense. So to recap what we just learned about emotional support animals, an emotional support animal provides a therapeutic benefit to people with qualifying psychiatric disabilities. They can be any domesticated animal. They do not require any training. They do require a qualified mental health professional to prescribe them as an emotional support animal, and they are not protected from discrimination by the ADA or the ACAA and are therefore subject to no pet or service animal only policies. They are protected by the Fair Housing Act as well as some state and local laws. Oh, stretch. I tried to find out why emotional support animals aren't protected by the ADA, like what justification they give, since emotional support animals are also for disabled people to help them live their lives, like me. The only reason I could find, admittedly I didn't spend a ton of time digging, is that it's just because of how the ADA defines service animal. A dog that's been trained to perform tasks for someone with a disability. Obviously, they can update or modify that definition because they later included a provision for mini horses. Hear me out, and I do want your guys' opinion on this. Service animals and emotional support animals both require that their owner has a disability. And to legally be considered a service animal, the dog, or mini horse, is required to be trained to perform tasks related to a disability. However, unless I'm missing something, which I think that I probably am, unless it's readily apparent that the animal in question is a service animal, like guiding a blind person, their status and protection as a service animal is more or less based on the honor system, because you never have to prove that the service animal can actually do the things you say it does. Emotional support animals, on the other hand, do require proof that a qualified mental health professional has prescribed that animal to a person with a disability. Both types of animals assist people with disabilities, but only one of them is required to prove it, and it's the one not protected by the ADA and can therefore be discriminated against. I must be missing something here, and I'm sure it's going to be really obvious when someone points it out or corrects me. So please tell me in the comments where my logic is wrong in this or my information is wrong. Now, I want to be clear here. I am not suggesting that service animals aren't valid or necessary or that anyone should be questioning their legitimacy. I'm just trying to understand why emotional support animals aren't afforded the same or even some protections against discrimination under the ADA. Just because an accommodation for a disability bothers or inconveniences you does not mean that your comfort or convenience should be prioritized over the needs of someone with a disability. This is the kind of discrimination that the ADA is designed to protect against. If, like a service animal, they're not being disruptive or posing a health or safety hazard, why are they still allowed to be discriminated against? Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and please tell me what I'm missing in my reasoning, because I really feel like I'm missing something. But I couldn't find anything beyond the technicality of how the ADA defines a service animal, or the type of animal that they protect. Miss Finn, emotional support animal, icon, and pug extraordinaire. I was going to do a whole deep dive into Miss Finn in this video, but I think I'll do that as a separate video, and in this one just stick to how she became an emotional support animal and what kinds of things she does for me in that role. Miss Finn didn't start out as an emotional support animal, but she did provide me with tremendous and at times life-saving emotional support from the moment she came into my life. I got her in 2013 while I was still living in Germany. And I know I talked about this in, I think it was my storytime video, but things in Germany were not good. One of the lowest points I've ever been in my life. And I was very isolated and very depressed and was really struggling with ideation. Trigger warning. I'm going to talk a little bit about a potentially triggering moment in my life, but I'm going to do it mindfully. I think it's just important to have some of these details in order to better understand how powerful an emotional support animal can be. Despite all of the love and joy she brought into my life, my depression got really, really bad in Germany. Like, this was one of those times where I wasn't just struggling with ideation in the way that I have for years. Like, this was one of those times where I nearly followed through with a plan. I mentioned before that one of the lead investigators on one of those studies about emotional support animals said that it's very common for people to cite their pets or emotional support animals as the reason for not following through with ending their lives. I didn't know that prior to researching for this video, but that definitely lines up with my experience of Miss Finn. And that's happened a few times. The first time she saved me, I was just about to let myself fall out of a 4th-story window. And it was like I had tunnel vision to where all of my thoughts and my focus were just honing in on letting go and letting myself fall. And then I heard Finn's nails click on the wall beneath me. And I looked down at her staring up at me, and I thought, I can't leave her. What would happen to her? I can't be certain that she'd go to someone who would love her and take good care of her. I love her, and I can't leave her. And so I got off the windowsill and shut the window and picked up Finn and went to bed and cuddled her. I'm 99% sure I would not be here if it wasn't for her in that moment. She helped me for years with my depression before I became disabled. And I think I can confidently say that not one day has gone by since she came into my life where I didn't have at least a fleeting moment of joy or an upwelling of love for her. A momentary break from the crushing weight of my depression. And then in 2017, something happened, and I fell apart and have been disabled ever since. I started really struggling with dissociation, and it was through therapy that we discovered that Miss Finn is very grounding for me and actually helps me manage my dissociation. When I feel myself starting to slip or fade out, I can reach for her, if she's not already in my lap, and cling to the feeling of her fur between my fingers and focus on her adorable face and smell her and hug her. And all of that helps. It helps to keep me here in the present moment. And it's especially useful in therapy to help keep me grounded or bring me back. She's stretching. Something I still struggle with a lot is anxiety and agoraphobia. And being able to have her with me is really the deciding factor on whether or not I go and do things. It's getting much easier for me to go out and do things, and I can feel the desire to go out and do things coming back as a result of Spravato. But even still, if I can't bring Miss Finn with me somewhere, I'm very likely not going to go. Also, having her around helps me feel a lot safer, or at least feel a degree of security, because I know that there's no way someone could be lurking around or attempting to break into my apartment without her alerting me to it. Thankfully, emotional support animals are protected by the Fair Housing Act, because otherwise it is extremely likely, in fact, a near certainty, that I would be homeless right now. And probably for years by this point. It is nothing short of a miracle that I found my apartment. There is literally no available low-income housing in my state, and they have a no pet policy. So if it weren't for the protection from the Fair Housing Act, I'd be homeless. I know that might sound extreme or ridiculous to a lot of people, but to me, she is more essential to my survival than having a roof over my head. And God, if I had been homeless for the last couple of years, who knows where I'd be right now, if I was alive at all. Without the safety and stability of a home and that basic survival need getting met, there isn't much else you can do in life or think about. I sure as hell wouldn't be here making these videos and recovering from my various mental illnesses and getting my life back. Kind of scary to even think about. Hopefully this video has helped you to understand what service and emotional support animals are and why emotional support animals are valid. If you liked this video or found it helpful in any way, please consider liking it, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one in the future. Also, be sure to turn on that bell icon so that you'll be notified every time I do post a new video. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for me, please leave them in the comments and I will respond to them. Also, let me know in the comments what you think about emotional support animals not being protected by the ADA, or if you have any information as to why they're not included. I really want to know. You can also email me at nicepeopletalk@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram. I have a Spravato appointment this Friday, so next week I'll have another update for you. I think that's it for this video. Say goodbye, Finn. Okay, bye.